The first time I saw Karen stomping up my gravel driveway, she was wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat like she was the sheriff of some dusty frontier town, except she wasn't here to keep the peace. She was here to start a war. I was standing inside my barn, oiling the saddle on my old quarter horse, when her voice cut through the summer air like a saw blade. "This building is now under the authority of the Oak Ridge HOA, she declared, one hand planted on her hip and the other clutching a thick folder of papers. I leaned against the barn door, letting her words sink in. "You mean my barn?" I asked slowly. "The one my grandfather built in '68 on land we've owned for 3 generations?" Her eyes narrowed behind her oversized sunglasses. "It's within the boundaries of our HOA jurisdiction. According to our revised community plan, this structure qualifies as a shared-use facility for neighborhood events." She said it like she was doing me a favor, like stealing my property was some kind of gift to the community. I glanced past her at the 2 HOA board members hovering by the fence, clearly uncomfortable. "Let me guess," I said. "You want me to hand over the keys so you can host your little wine and cheese parties in here?" Karen smiled without humor. "We'll take care of it from now on. You can attend events as a guest." That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a takeover attempt, and she thought I'd just roll over. I crossed my arms. "You have no legal claim to this barn, and you're trespassing." Her smile widened, and she held up a paper stamped with the HOA seal. "The vote passed last night. It's ours now." 3 days later, I found a notice nailed to my front gate. "Failure to vacate the barn will result in HOA enforcement action." It was signed in Karen's curling, self-important handwriting. That night, I pulled out my property deed, my grandfather's survey maps, and every dusty file I could find in the old roll-top desk. And there it was, the gold nugget in the pile. A recorded easement filed with the county, specifically stating that my barn and the surrounding acre were exempt from any future subdivision restrictions. Ironclad. But I didn't want to just beat Karen in court. I wanted her to understand, once and for all, that my barn wasn't just off-limits, it was a world she couldn't control. So I made a few calls. My cousin Jake was a rodeo stock contractor, and my friend Shelby ran a trick riding team. If Karen wanted a community facility, I'd give her one she'd never forget. The transformation took a week. We cleaned out the barn, set up bleachers, and fenced in a small arena just outside. Word spread faster than I expected. By Friday night, there were hay bales stacked along the drive, a grill smoking by the paddock, and a crowd gathering, neighbors, friends, even folks from outside the HOA who'd heard about the showdown. Karen showed up halfway through the first bronc ride, stomping up to the arena gate like she could stop the whole show with a wave of her clipboard. "This is an unauthorized event." She barked over the microphone's crackle as the announcer introduced the next bull rider. "You are in violation of HOA regulations and will be fined immediately." I stepped into the ring, boots kicking up dust, and took the mic. "Karen, this barn is protected by a recorded county easement, which means it's not and never has been under your HOA." I held up a laminated copy for the crowd to see. "This here is my jurisdiction." The bleachers erupted in cheers, the kind that made it clear the audience wasn't on her side. Her face flushed red as the announcer's voice boomed, "Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big hand to the owner of the Oak Ridge Rodeo Arena." And that's when the twist hit. A county sheriff's deputy stepped forward from the sidelines. Turns out, one of my guests had invited him, and he'd been enjoying a pulled pork sandwich until Karen's outburst pulled him into the spotlight. "Ma'am," the deputy said evenly, "I've reviewed the property records. You're trespassing and you need to leave." Karen sputtered, waving her papers in the air. "This is a community facility." He shook his head. "Not according to the county. And if you keep interfering with this lawful event, you'll be cited for harassment." The crowd was silent for half a second before bursting into applause again. Karen's mouth worked like she was trying to summon one last retort, but all that came out was a choked, "This isn't over," before she turned on her heel and stomped off toward her SUV. I figured that might be the last we'd see of her, but I was wrong. She had one more move left in her, and it was going to make the coming weeks a whole lot more interesting. Karen's one more move came the following Tuesday morning. I woke to the sound of my dogs barking. Not the friendly someone's here bark, but the sharp, angry one that meant trouble. When I stepped onto the porch, there she was again, flanked by two strangers in polo shirts with HOA compliance enforcement stitched on the chest. They were standing at the barn doors with bolt cutters in hand like they were about to perform some heroic rescue mission on my property. I didn't say a word at first. I just let them see me walking down the gravel path in my work boots, coffee mug steaming in my hand, until their eyes started darting around for an exit. "Morning," I said evenly. "You boys here to trespass, or just vandalize?" Karen jumped in before either of them could speak. "We're here to secure HOA property. You've been operating without permission, and this barn is being locked down." Her tone was even more self-assured than the first time, like the weekend crowd and the deputy's warning hadn't happened. That's when my ace walked into frame. Deputy Cole, the same officer from the rodeo night, had parked his cruiser just outside the drive. He'd been nearby and decided to stop in for some of Shelby's famous biscuits. "Ma'am," he said, stepping between me and Karen's so-called enforcers. "You're already on record for trespassing. You come back here with tools, you're looking at breaking and entering." Karen's voice wavered, but she doubled down. "We have authority over this property. The HOA voted." Cole didn't blink. "The county doesn't recognize your vote. And this," he said, pointing to my laminated easement posted on the barn wall, "is all the authority anyone needs here. If you want to test it, I'll be happy to process the charges now." The two men in polo shirts looked at each other, muttered something about miscommunication, and walked quickly back to their truck. Karen stayed just long enough to spit out, "You'll regret this when the board takes legal action," before storming off in a cloud of dust. That was her last in-person attempt. But behind the scenes, she was busy trying to smear me. Flyers started appearing in mailboxes around the neighborhood. Unlicensed business operating in violation of community standards. They had grainy photos from rodeo night and wild claims about noise, safety hazards, and attracting undesirable crowds. What she didn't count on was the number of people who'd been at the rodeo and loved every minute of it. Within a week, the HOA's own message board was full of residents defending the barn and calling out Karen's lies. A petition to bar her from any further HOA leadership gathered over 200 signatures in just 3 days. George Miller told me over coffee, "Nathan, I've never seen people this united against her before. You've got momentum. Use it." So I did. I filed a formal harassment complaint with the county, attaching the flyers, photos of her trespassing, and statements from witnesses. I also invited the local paper to cover the next rodeo, making sure they understood the backstory. The reporter ate it up by the following Friday. The headline read, "Local man turns HOA dispute into community rodeo revival." When the next event rolled around, the place was packed. Families brought lawn chairs and coolers, kids wore cowboy hats, and the air smelled like barbecue and popcorn. Halfway through the night, the reporter from the paper took the mic to thank everyone for supporting a tradition that brings people together. The crowd roared, and I caught sight of Karen's SUV parked far down the road, engine running, her silhouette stiff in the driver's seat. She didn't get out. The final blow came from an unexpected source, the county tax office. It turned out Karen had been so busy fighting me that she'd missed the HOA's own tax filings for the clubhouse property. They slapped the HOA with penalties and fees, draining the last of their reserves. With no money left to pay for her endless campaigns, the board finally voted to censure her and strip her of membership privileges entirely. George called me the day it happened. "She's out, Nathan. Not just as president, she's barred from the HOA altogether. No voting rights, no access to funds, no influence. She's done." I won't lie, hearing those words felt like the dust settling after a long, hard ride. Not because I wanted her destroyed, but because the community finally had breathing room. The next month, the board actually partnered with me to host a charity rodeo benefiting the volunteer fire department. The barn was alive with laughter, music, and the sound of hooves hitting dirt under the floodlights. After the last ride, I stood in the arena looking at the crowd. Neighbors who'd once been divided now swapping plates of ribs, and swapping stories like old friends. It hit me then. This wasn't just about keeping my barn. It was about reclaiming a piece of the community from fear and control. I left the arena sign up permanently. HOA free zone. Not as a taunt, but as a reminder that some spaces should always belong to the people, not the paper pushers. Now, whenever a new face shows up at the rodeo and asks how it started, I tell them the story of Karen and the barn she tried to claim. And I always end with the same question I'll leave you with now: was I right to turn her power grab into a public spectacle? Or should I have just fought her quietly in court and kept the dust down?